All right, good afternoon. For those of you who I haven't met personally, I'm Vic Reynolds. I'm the District Attorney of the Cobb Judicial Circuit. I'll have a brief statement, and I'll certainly make myself available for questionings along with Mr. Boring, Mr. Evans, Ms. Treadaway, the trial team. As you're well aware by now, a Glenn County jury has returned a guilty verdict on all counts of the state of Georgia versus Justin Ross Harris. I will tell you that today is not a day we consider a victory. It's not a verdict that we celebrate. In fact, today is a monumentally sad day. It's the culmination of a 29-month journey that ended with the guilty verdicts that the jury returned today. When this case began some 2.5 years ago, our goal was singular in nature, and that was to seek justice on behalf of young Cooper Harris, and we believe, in fact, today that justice has been achieved. I do briefly want to take a moment to thank the community of Glenn County, Georgia for accepting us here, allowing us to try this case. We certainly feel a kinship to this community, not only because of the trial, but because of going through the Hurricane Matthew with them. I want to take a moment to thank the court officials in Glenn County, particularly DA Jackie Johnson, Sheriff Jump, their staffs for their graciousness and their hospitality. I want to take a moment to thank the Cobb County Police Department, and particularly Detective Phil Stoddard for his investigation in this case, for their diligence, for their hard work. I've often said up in Cobb that I believe the Cobb PD is one of the finest police departments in the state of Georgia and the southeastern United States, and it's an honor for us to stand shoulder to shoulder with them day in and day out, and I certainly want to thank my staff. I cannot begin to tell you the hard work that these individuals have put into this case, how they literally have placed their lives on hold for a great deal of time away from their families, away from their loved ones. They've missed children's birthdays, they've missed anniversaries to be down here in this community seeking justice in this case. And I'm so very proud to work with each one of these individuals day in and day out. Not only Chuck Boring, who led this trial team, and Jesse Evans and Susan Treadaway, but all the people that you don't see behind the scenes who do the work day in and day out. And lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't pay my professional respects to the defense team in this case. They certainly did a fine job representing Mr. Harris. They were zealous advocates, and he was well represented throughout. I'll certainly make myself available, as well as Mr. Boring, if you have questions for us.
Dick, was justice served today?
I believe categorically, unequivocally, that justice was served today. Absolutely.
Chuck, and we asked you a couple questions.
Yeah, sure.
Did you get a chance to speak with the jurors, and what kind of feedback did you get from them about the case?
We did speak with them. The feedback, I mean, they were very diligent, and speaking with them, they were almost unanimous early on, but they thought there was a duty they had to go through all the evidence and make sure that they weren't missing anything. So I really have to tip my hat to these jurors. They were honestly just amazing. The hard work they put into it, and it's stuff that I think we take for granted in our office. We look at this stuff all the time, and we kind of get numb and jaded to it. These are ordinary individuals and citizens who, quite frankly, should never have to look at this stuff, and they did, and they sat through it, looked through every piece of evidence, and reached a verdict after, looking through thousands of pieces of evidence.
Chuck, there were the three murder charges, but they came back with malice. Did they tell you that was unanimous early on, and what were they?
Even with that, it was almost unanimous. There were a few people that were, they wanted to talk about it. Obviously, they all did. But after going through all the evidence and one by one, kind of as the investigation did, we thought initially maybe this was a negligent homicide, and then the actual facts, the evidence stared us in the face and stared the detectives in the face, and you couldn't ignore it.
Did they say if there was a key piece of evidence that made them lean toward guilt?
And it wasn't just one thing. And speaking with the jurors, it was, just everything. You look at one thing, maybe that could be excusable, but then you look at this part and this part and this part, and the only thing that makes sense was his guilt.
At what point during the investigation, when y'all were looking at the case, did y'all become convinced that this was malicious?
I guess our opinions and beyond a reasonable doubt are two different things. I think our opinions early on, within a couple of weeks, we were going to follow every angle that we could and every lead that we could, but we couldn't ignore what we were seeing back then. Now, of course, it was a while into the investigation until legally the decision was made to charge with malice. So, but very early on, the evidence and the facts did, it was obvious.
Christian, let me tell you this, Christian. I will tell you that in this case, literally from the very beginning, I know Mr. Evans was involved in it from the very first day. the Cobb PD, when they reached out to us, said something is not right about this case. There's something wrong about this case. And we didn't go into the case hoping that it would be a malice murder, didn't go into the case hoping that it would be anything but some god-awful tragic accident. But as Chuck said, as brick by brick by brick by brick started laying in front of us, the foundation was built to proceed on with malice murder. And I will tell you, literally from the very second, the very minute those detectives were there, they indicated to us that there was something not right about this case.
Chuck, you're a father. All of these people have kids. How hard has this been on all of you personally?
Personally, I think it has affected us all differently in different ways, but it's all affected us immeasurably. You know, my son turned 1 last week, and so, you know, personally, it's been tough missing those things. But luckily, all of our families knew that this was a greater cause. So.
What did the jury think about Leanna's testimony?
You know, that's one of the things, they really didn't talk to us about that too much, and I think that's it, just kind of seeing how things have gone, seeing, you know, social media and things of that nature. People can interpret it a lot of different ways.
Did anything surprise you in this case? The demeanor of the defendant, the demeanor of his ex-wife? I mean, was it anything?
A lot surprised me from the get-go. There are numerous things that you know, there are so many things that you just never encountered that were present in this case. So it's kind of hard to put your finger on one thing that it was just.
Like what give anything?
Having to describe certain things to jurors in front of cameras when you know the entire nation was watching you explain what that word was, that was very unusual.
Chuck, you mentioned that at the beginning that this is stuff that you guys see, but the jurors really don't. But I got the impression as this trial went on that this was something that, you know, different for you, that you didn't deal with too often. Describe your emotions. I could tell in closings that this meant more to you than maybe other cases.
It did, probably just because of the extent of, you know, the depravity of what we saw and how somebody could be capable. And you have to accept that somebody's capable of this level of evil. And we see it, and, you know, as far as we're jaded, we know that this is possible, but seeing it to this level, doing that to another human being, you know, even for the people like us, you know, Mr. Reynolds, Mr. Evans, Ms. Treadaway, see, you know, cases involving, you know, death all the time and horrible things. Even this was just, it really affected everybody.
Chuck, you call this, when you were doing your closings, you call this a crime of opportunity. Do you guys think that, you know, it was just a spur of the moment action?
You know, and that's one of the things. It's tough to figure out exactly what moment it was that triggered this. You know, you look at the evidence in entirety, and of course, you know, our belief is he was planning this for a while or thinking about it, and I think that morning, the opportunity presented itself, and he took advantage of it.
You said at first that it wasn't unanimous for the jurors. What was the thing that was keeping some of them held back?
I think it was just they had just gotten there and hadn't looked at any of the evidence, and so that's kind of you know, it wasn't that they were not agreeing with what they should all vote or what the verdict should be, but more along the lines of, okay, here's where we're at. Let's talk about the evidence now.
What were they looking for in those videos? Because they came back in to the courtroom to look at some of them.
Yeah, and some of that, it's funny talking with the jurors, you know, kind of as we talked about in our closing arguments, we can sit here and look at one thing and we pick up on certain things, but with 12 people, they may see something that we never really caught on to. And there were some interesting perspectives in there about some things that went on specifically with the trip back to the car at lunch about what hand he used to open the door, did he have the bag in that, some other things that really kind of stuck out to the jurors.
What can you?
Like having the bag of light bulbs in his left hand and using that to open the door and then throwing the light bulbs in was one perspective that was put out there by jurors. And things like that, it's just, you know, and it's different things for different jurors.
Chuck,
So
what's the appropriate punishment in this case?
it's kind of a loaded question. I think we have sentencing coming up. The maximum is life without parole. So we'll.
You know, Ross, we'll have some discussion in the office. We'll reach out to individuals involved in counts 6, 7, and 8 as far as the victims are concerned. In fact, we're mandated by law to do that, so that's the process that we'll be going through in the next little bit, reaching out to them. We'll have some discussion among the trial team in conjunction with what victims say, and we'll be making a recommendation on December 5.
What did the jury tell you was the strongest bit of evidence that they saw?
The entirety of it. You know, honestly, going through every little bit of it. It wasn't one thing that they said, this proves malice. It was everything.
You know, we're getting a lot of
we're getting a lot of feedback with people saying there's been so many hot car deaths as of lately. What made this case different for you? And people are also asking about the process of grieving and how people grieve in different ways. Will this always be an issue of people should grieve in a specific type of way? Because one of the big things that we kept hearing about is that he wasn't grieving appropriately.
Well, I think that to start with, what was different in this case initially was you have cases where, you know, you have these hot car deaths, and these facts were completely different than those cases. So that, from almost like a scientific angle, did not add up. And then as far as the grieving process, you know, that's one factor that the police looked at initially. Obviously, you have people react in different ways. However, this was inconsistent with anything that you usually see. But that was, you know, initially, even with that, that wasn't the basis to charge him with doing this intentionally. It was everything that came after that. You know, that is just one small piece or one, I guess, clue to the police to dig a little further in the case.
Chuck, you took a lot of heat for those search warrants. A lot of it did not make it to the jurors. Will anything change as far as cases like this and what is done early on when you're one detective is talking to someone, another detective is going to take out warrants, they say this is what happens every time. Will anything change? Would you recommend anything change?
You know, I think in this case, to be honest, there was a lot of conversation after that, and they reached out to us based on you know, the search warrants, and that's why another batch was done, because we wanted to firm up some of the things that were attacked by the defense. Frankly, I think were matters of semantics completely. That was their duty to do as defense attorneys, to attack that. However, our belief is that the statements in the search warrants were accurate. It was just maybe not the phrase that the defense would have liked the officers to use.
What did the jurors say to you about Ross Harris's emotion?
Honestly, we didn't really discuss that back there that much. They didn't really talk a lot about it.
Has the door been completely closed on Leanna Taylor? Or will there be more investigations as far as her possibly being involved?
We'll leave that to Cobb County Police.
Jesse, you've done a lot of cases here, and I mean in Cobb County. You've seen a lot of horrible things. What stands out in your mind about this case?
Well, obviously, whenever you're dealing with a child homicide, is a little bit different. And yes, we see all kinds of different cases, but you know, you always want to make sure that you're bringing justice and putting your best foot forward when you're doing your investigation in a case like this. And you know, credit to Cobb Police, and particularly to Chuck Boring, who took this case on his shoulders and you know, really spearheaded the investigation and the prosecution of the case. And I think it'll be a memorable experience for us all, and I think we've all learned from the experience.
Jesse, there's a lot of cases that you have done where there's the proverbial smoking gun. Just describe how this is different from that and how challenging it is.
Well, you know, all cases are built by looking at the totality of the circumstances, and sometimes you do have that smoking gun, and sometimes it's not as readily apparent. You've got to peel the layers of the onion, so to speak, to be able to figure out exactly what the truth is. And our goal in this investigation from the outset, from when we initially took the call, the day that it happened, to the day of the verdict, is to bring the truth out to the courtroom where it needed to be presented. And credit again to Cobb Police, and credit to Mr. Boring and to our team for being able to look at the evidence and scrutinize it and make sure that we're able to put our best foot forward and bring this evidence out to a jury that needed to hear this and hear all of the facts and circumstances, and not just one side of it.
And I think this is one of those occasions where obviously the actions speak louder than words in this case. And anybody who could do this, and the evidence showed that he did this intentionally, he has malice in his heart, absolutely. And you know, it's one of those things where I think, like we argued in closing argument, and like his half-brother said, you know, it's oftentimes with these cases we deal with, if it's somebody in a position of responsibility, somebody in a religious organization, something like that, that everybody in the world thinks is this great person, oftentimes we find those are the people that take advantage of the most vulnerable. And I think this case kind of screams that.